Today we're going to continue along in chapter 4. We're actually going to hit sections 4.6 and 4.7, and we're going to do some more work with loops. 4.6 does something called running totals and sentinels, and 4.7 talks about nested loops. So if I want to get into 4.6 right away, I'm going to say, what is a running total? And it's something that we're going to sum up a bunch of numbers somehow as we go through the program. We need to have some sort of accumulator would be a key word to use, a way to accumulate a total as we're going through the program. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I have a note here, is we're going to go back and work on the code that we did the last class, and we're going to add the totals to the program. And that's the one where we added the numbers 1 to 10 and we added their sums 1 to 10. So I'm going to share my screen, and if you want to have Java up so you can run it today, that would be great. Otherwise you could follow along with my screen. Again, it was the for loop example that I sent to you and posted it in D2L from the other day. All right, so I grabbed the program and I'm going to do a quick run of it. And if I remember right, there was no user input. All it did was print out a nice table with the numbers 1 to 10 and their squares. So I had headings. I had the headings numbers and I had the heading squares. And when I looked back into the program, I noticed that I did that in line 14, which was before my for loop. So I said to my outstra numbers and squares with a carriage return on it. I could have done underlines if I want to make it really neat, keep adding to outstra as I go. But for now, it's just sitting there with the heading. Okay. I had the for loop for 1 to 10. And I did an output of outstra plus counter, and then I had a whole bunch of spaces, and then I did the squares. Now, some of you are looking at that table going, that didn't line up very well. I didn't like it. It's not making me happy. Well, if you remember back in the last chapter, at the end of chapter 3, we talked about one of the of formatting, and one of the ways to format was we could set a field width. And that was something that was in the book. Remember, we had 2 different versions of formatting. Well, there's one that we could set the field with, and that's the one that comes from the book. So if you wanted your output to look really clean instead of a bunch of spaces between it and line them up, then that's kind of what you would have to do to make that output look better. All right, so we're talking about accumulators right now, running totals. So I'm going to go back into the program. I'm going to go up to my declaration section, and I'm going to create an int called TOT capital NUM, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. And I'm also going to create an int TOT SQU. I'm going to set that equal to 0. I'm going to give them initial values. It's always good to give them initial values to be safe. So the TOT is going to be the total for my numbers, and the TOT SQU is going to be an accumulator, or the total of my squares. So now, where do I accumulate those? Well, I'm going to go down in my loop, and in the body of the loop, I'm going to say TOT NUM equals TOT NUM plus counter, because I want to add 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And some of you already know the sum of the numbers 1 to 10, because you know that that is n times n plus 1 divided by 2. So 10 times 11 divided by 2 is 55. Some of you remember that formula, hopefully. And there was even one for the sum of squares, something you get in maybe pre-calc. I don't know if you do it in Math 103 or not. But so I do the tot num. Now I'm going to do tot SQU equals, not minus, equals tot SQU plus, and what is it I want to add to counter? CTR times CTR. All right. So now all of that work is being done in my loop, and I don't need to display it in my loop because it would display 10 times. But once I'm outside of the loop, I may now take my output string, OUTSTR equals OUTSTR plus double quote. Here is the total of the numbers.
Hey, Professor,
Yep.
which file are you in now? The
For loop
Okay.
EX. Yeah.
Okay.
For loop EX. And to this, I'm going to add my tot num. And then next line, I'm going to add to my outstra so that this all comes out after is OUTSTR plus here is the total of the squares, colon, double quote, plus tot SQU. So again, I did headings before I got in the loop because I only wanted the headings once. I added lines to my table inside the loop. And then when I was done, I added 2 more lines that should display at the very end.
On.
So if I save that and cross my fingers that I didn't make any typos, I find it. Yes, I did make a typo. What is my error?
Use the colon.
Yeah, I used a colon. All right, let's try it again. All right, and of course I still have another error. I forgot another semicolon. Goodness gracious. I get excited and miss the basics. All right, feeling a little better. It's taken a while to compile. It looks like it compiles. It has all the numbers. My output, here's the total of the numbers 55. Here's the total of the squares 385. Looks like I needed a return in there, a /n. All right, so I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add an extra /n. /n. And it should work with a little luck. Everybody else having the same kind of luck? Sound good?
I have a question.
Yes.
Sometimes when I do that and I put the output statement outside of the loop,
Yeah.
it tells me that the variables inside of the statement weren't initialized.
Right. So if you go back up to my declaration section, line number 11, I say outstra equals double quotes. Sometimes you have a variable inside of a loop or inside of an if statement that the program says, hey, it may never get a value because it may never get executed inside of those conditions. So it's not initialized. In order to fix it, come up to the beginning, like in line 11, and say outstra equals space double quotes with nothing inside, called the null string. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Other questions? All right, I can save that and read this. I did save it. I will put that back on D2L as an updated. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And I want to talk about something called a Sentinel value. Okay. Sentinel value is a special value that cannot be mistaken as a member of the list. So sometimes I'm going to be asking the user to input numbers. And the problem is I don't know how many values the user is going to enter. So I need a way, I need a value that is unique, that when I say enter this number, I know that you no longer want to enter any more numbers. Good example, if I was saying enter test scores, okay? What would be a test score to signal that there are no more test scores? What's a test score that's not realistic?
-1.
-1, right. And that's the perfect Sentinel value. So you could say, please enter in values, enter -1 when you are finished, kind of deal. And that's called a Sentinel value. Okay? So what I'm going to have you do now, and I'm going to type it while I'm going, is I want you to write the code to find the average age of your classmates. And I want you to use 999 as a Sentinel value. Okay, so here's what's got to happen. You're going to be asking for an age. If they enter 999, you're done. You ask an age, somebody types in 23. Okay, I need to add that to total because I'm going to find the average age. But I'm also going to have a counter that keeps track of how many students there are. So that after I'm done entering all the ages, I need that total age divided by the number of students so that I'm able to find the average. Think you can write that on your own?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to write it on my screen as well. And we can make some comparisons. So I'm going to pause the recording. I'll pick it back up in a little bit. All right, so let's take a look at what I came up with for the program. I took my old one and deleted the guts out and renamed it Sentinel and saved it real quick. So I was off to a pretty good start. I have a declaration section. I have instra and outstra. And I know outstra might be in a loop, so I gave it initial value of the null string. I have int num students equals 0, int total age equals 0. I have int age, because that's what it's going to be read into, and double average, because I know I want to make it a double. And I didn't get into any formatting, but I do want it to be a double. So the first thing I did was ask for an age, because remember, they may want to enter 999 to start and be done. So I do an instra, please enter the age, and then I put 999 to end. Age equals integer dot parse int. Okay, so I got my first age. Next thing, while age is not equal to 999, so actually, what is my loop control variable for this program? What's controlling my loop?
Age.
Age, right? So in line 21, I say age gets integer dot parse int. That's the initial value. In line 23, I say while age is not equal to 999, that's my check. And in the body of my loop, I ask for the age again. That's my increment or slash update. And you can see how that works. So I give it an initial value, it changes, and I have a check. Inside my loop, I increment num students. I add age to total age. And then I ask for a new student. Look pretty good. The order of these things does in fact matter. So we want to ask for the age before we get in the loop. Then once we're in the loop, that means we have at least one good one. We increment num students and we add to total age. Then I ask for another student. Once I come out of that loop, I do average equals, and this time I'm going to cast total age because that integer division, I want a better average than just that. And some of you may remember back to a program where you were asked to find the average of 3 numbers. And the decimal does in fact become important. So average equals double total age divided by num students, num stu. Then my outstra is the total age of the num stu variable students is, and then average. Okay. And I don't know if you saw, I ran it. Quick test data for me were the numbers 3, 4, and 5. 3, 4, 5. And now I do 999 to end. And I get the total age of 3 students is 4.0. Okay. And again, why double? Well, what if I ran this and I said the first student is 1, the second student is 2, they're geniuses. And what's the average? Well, I'd want 1.5. I wouldn't want 1. So it's important to have that as a double to display. Questions? Okay, so that's a Sentinel value. You saw accumulators, you saw counters, and we were working on keeping track of all those things inside of our loop because we want to use them outside of the loop. Next section, you saw a brief program with this, but we're going to take a look at some better examples, and that is how to work with nested loops. And a nested loop is a loop inside of a loop. Just like we had nested if statements, I'm allowed to put whatever code in the body of something that I want to. So we do have these things called nested loops. When we get to chapter 7, you're going to see better use of nested loops, but we're introducing them now because we're in the loop chapter. And the first example I have is a nested loop. I say for counter 1 equals 1, counter 1 is less than 12, counter 1 plus plus. Right below that, I have the nested loop. For counter 2 equals 1, counter 2 is less than or equal to 5, counter 2 plus plus. Well, let's see how that works. So if I was to hand trace, I'd have a variable called counter 1. I'd have a variable called counter 2. And say inside this body, right, of the second loop, of what we call the inner loop, I'm just displaying hi mom. Okay? So let's see what happens. I want to know how many times this works. So my outer loop, counter gets a value of 1. Now I get into my inner loop, counter is going to get the value of 1. Then it's going to stay in that inner loop. So my outer loop, counter 1, stays at 1, but now counter 2 becomes 2. And I'm going to stay in that inner loop. Counter 1 is 1, this is 3. Stay in that inner loop. This is 1, counter 2 is 4. Let's see, counter 2 is equal to 1, less than or equal to 5. I need to do it one more time. So the outer loop starts at 1. The inner loop goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Now, when the inner loop's done, what happens? It jumps up to the outer loop. Now, my counter 1 becomes 2, and I start the inner loop all over again. So this is now going to be 2 for counter 1, 1 for counter 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5. Now I go back up to my outer loop again. Now becomes 3. And I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then it's going to become 4, 1, 2, 3. It's going to go all the way up to 11. So this outer loop goes from 1 to 11. That looks more like a 5 than an 11. 1 to 11. And the inner loop is going from 1 to 5. So how many times would hi mom be printed?
55 times.
55 times, right? So the outer loop's 1, 5 times, 2, 5 times, 6, 5 times, 10, 5 times, 11, 5 times. So 11 times 5, it would actually print hi mom 55 times. Okay, so the next one example I have written here is for row equals 0, row is less than 3, row plus plus. Then I have for column equals 0, column is less than 3, column plus plus. And if I think about it, row is going to be, let me erase something real quick. So now I'm going to have row is going to be 0, column is going to be 0. Row is going to be 0, column will be 1, row will be 0, column will be 2. Then I'm going to switch. I go back to my outer loop. Row is 1, column 0, row is 1, column 1, row is 1, column 2. And then finally 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. Now, eventually, when we learn about arrays, This guy is going to look something like a tic-tac-toe board where I have 3 rows and 3 columns. And this is a way to go through these rows and columns by using this type of loop right here. Okay? I'm going to have you now do, and it's tricky, so I'm going to give you some time to do. It's not a lot of code, but it's thinking. I want you to do for loops, nested for loops, and say up in this first one, when I had counter 1 and counter 2, instead of displaying hi mom, I would have displayed counter 1 and counter 2. The bunch of numbers would have come out. 1, 1, 1, 2, and so on. Well, let's go take a look at that real quick in code and see if we can get that to print out. And I'm just going to do it to a system.out.println because right now we're just in code mode. So I'm going to create 2 variables, int ctr1, ctr2. I'm going to say for ctr1 gets an initial value of 1, ctr1 is less than 12, ctr1 plus plus. Now I'm going to have my inner loop for ctr2 equals 1, ctr2 is less than or equal to 5, ctr2 plus plus. Now all I want to do inside of this body is 1 line, so I don't need braces. I'm going to do system.out.println, and let's see, what do I want to do? I want to do ctr1 plus some spaces plus ctr2. And let's see if this works. And down in my lower console box, I get the numbers 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, and so on. Pretty good? Anybody there, Bueller?
Pretty good.
Okay, pretty good. All right, so everybody's got to look at it. System.out.println was the only line in my body, so I didn't need the braces. I have an outer loop and an inner loop. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do now is show you what I want you to display. And I want you to figure out how to take those loops, the outer loop and the inner loop, and manipulate them so they print out the following numbers: 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, 3, 4, 3, 5, and then 4, 5. And I'll give that to you again. I need to erase. And then the second thing I'd like you to do is print out 1 asterisk, 2 asterisks, 3 asterisks, and 4 asterisks using nested for loops. All right, so I'm going to put you in small groups. I'm going to leave this on my camera. I don't know if any of you want to screenshot it real quick or take a picture or something. But I want you to display the following code. And then the second thing I want you to do is display the asterisks. 1 asterisk, 2 asterisk, 3 asterisk, 4 asterisks. Questions? Okay, I'm going to create 5 rooms, 4 in a room, and we can go from, it's not going to be a lot of code. I already gave you an example with the for loops, and I think you typed it in. So let's see what you got.